Between the 15th and 18th centuries, tens of thousands of people, mostly being women, were executed for witchcraft. Many were tortured into confessing crimes they never committed. Behind these trials was a single book. A book that convinced judges, priests and ordinary people that witches were real. This book was called Malleus Maleficarum, and many historians nowadays consider it one of the most dangerous books ever written. But before I get to the book itself and the witch trials, we need to go back to the late 1400s. At the time, Europe was a very different world. Disease, famine, failed harvest and infant mortality were part of everybody's life. People didn't look towards science for answers, but instead would turn towards religion for all the tragedies around them. And if Satan was believed to be real, then it only seemed logical that his followers might be real too. It was into this world where we find the author of the book, a man named Heinrich Kramer. Kramer was a Catholic priest appointed by the church to investigate people suspected of going against his teachings. But he became obsessed with one particular enemy, witches. Kramer argued that women were more likely to become witches because they were supposedly weaker in faith, more emotionally unstable, more easily deceived, and more driven by sexual desire. These ideas reflected long-standing medieval stereotypes about women rather than actual evidence. The book even states, "All witchcraft comes from carnal lust, which in women is insatiable." That sentence has become one of the book's most infamous passages. He believed they had made pacts with the devil, attended secret gatherings, cast spells and were responsible for many of society's misfortunes. Yet luckily not everyone shared his convictions. In 1485 he arrived in the Austrian city of Innsbruck to investigate reports of witchcraft. Among the women he accused was Helena Schöberin, the outspoken wife of a local citizen. According to witnesses, Helena publicly criticized Kramer, refusing to attend one of his sermons and openly questioning his authority. Kramer quickly became convinced she was a witch. He accused her of using magic to murder people, cause illness and corrupt the community, all without any actual evidence. But this time, things didn't go according to plan. The local bishop overseeing the investigation became increasingly frustrated with Kramer. He believed Kramer relied on weak evidence, personal bias and aggressive interrogation. Eventually the bishop ordered the proceedings to stop. Helena was released, and Kramer was effectively thrown out of the city. But instead of questioning his own beliefs, he became even more convinced he was right. If judges refused to believe him, then he would write a book that made it impossible to ignore the threat he believed witches posed. Just 1 year later he began writing the Malleus Maleficarum. In 1487 Heinrich Kramer published the book. Its name meant the Hammer of Witches. The book was divided into 3 parts. The first argued that witches were real and that denying their existence was itself dangerous. The second part described the crimes witches supposedly committed. Flying through the night, making pacts with the devil, destroying crops, spreading disease, causing impotence, even murdering children. There was no actual evidence for any of these claims, but in the book they were presented as an unquestionable fact. The third section may have been the most dangerous of all. It instructed judges how to investigate witchcraft, how to question suspects, what evidence to accept, and when torture could be used to force a confession. In many ways it became a handbook for persecution, but a book alone couldn't ignite centuries of witch hunts. First it had to convince Europe to trust it. You might think that after Kramer had been dismissed by the bishop, his book would simply disappear. That people would see him as nothing more than a fanatic. But that isn't what happened. At the very front of the book, Kramer printed an official document issued by the Pope. This did acknowledge concerns about witchcraft and gave inquisitors authority to investigate, but it did not officially endorse the Malleus Maleficarum itself. Even so, its placement made the book appear to carry the Pope's approval. Then came another advantage. The printing press had only recently transformed Europe. For the first time a book like this could spread rapidly across the continent. And that's exactly what happened. Many scholars criticized the book, but others embraced it. Not because it proved witches existed, but because it offered frightened judges something they desperately wanted. An explanation for all the chaos around them. Disease, failed harvest, wars, religious conflicts. If all could be blamed on witches, then suddenly there was an enemy to hunt. But what made it especially dangerous was that it created a system almost impossible to escape. If a woman would deny she was a witch, that could be taken as proof the devil was helping her lie. If she would confess under torture, that confession became proof she was guilty. Either way, the accusation seemed to prove itself. Once someone had been accused, there were very few easy ways out. The deadliest wave of witch hunts wouldn't come until the late 1500s and early 1600s. Kramer had been dead for decades, but by then his ideas had taken on a life of their own. One of the most infamous examples was the trial of Dorothea Flock in the German city of Bamberg. Dorothea came from a wealthy and respected family. She was married to George Flock, a prominent merchant, and was pregnant with her child when she was arrested in 1629. But her social status made no difference. She had been accused of witchcraft and was imprisoned. As was so often the case, there was little meaningful evidence against her. Instead, the accusations were built on rumors, forced testimonies, and confessions extracted from others under torture. Her husband desperately tried to save her. He appealed to powerful officials, petitioned the emperor himself, and argued that the trial was unlawful. For a moment it would seem she might be spared, but the authorities in Bamberg ignored the growing pressure. Even an order from the Holy Roman Emperor to halt the proceedings arrived too late. On May 17, 1630, Dorothea Flock was led to the place of execution. She was burned alive. Her death became one of the most shocking examples of just how far the witch hunts had spiraled beyond reason. But unfortunately, her case was far from unique. Across Europe, tens of thousands of people were executed for witchcraft. Over the course of the witch hunts, the vast majority of them being women. It's not that every court followed the Malleus Maleficarum word for word, but its methods, its arguments and its assumptions had become deeply embedded in the way many judges approach accusations of witchcraft. For countless innocent people, once an accusation was made, escaping it almost became impossible. By the end of the 17th century, the great European witch hunts started to fade. The Age of Enlightenment was taking hold. Science gradually replaced superstition. Courts became more skeptical of confessions extracted under torture, and many of the beliefs that at once seemed unquestionable were increasingly challenged. Eventually, the executions slowed down, and for the most part, they stopped. So, did the Malleus Maleficarum single-handedly cause the witch hunts? No. Accusations of witchcraft existed long before Kramer ever picked up a pen, and fear, religious conflict, political instability, famine, disease all played a role in fueling persecutions that swept across Europe. But the Malleus did something different. It gathered centuries of superstition into a single volume. It presented rumors as facts, prejudice as theology, and suspicion as evidence. More importantly, it offered judges and inquisitors a framework for identifying, interrogating and prosecuting people accused of witchcraft. It gave intellectual and religious legitimacy to ideas that many authorities had once questioned, helping to standardize how witchcraft cases were approached across different parts of Europe. Its influence extended far beyond Heinrich Kramer himself. By then his ideas had taken on a life of their own. Today historians continue to debate exactly how much influence the Malleus had on the witch hunts. And it's hard to know. What they rarely disagree on, however, is that it became one of history's most influential manuals of persecution. Its pages reminds us that some of the world's most dangerous weapons are not always swords or guns. Sometimes they are ideas. Ideas that convince ordinary people that their neighbors are the enemy. Ideas that turn fear into certainty. And ideas that once written down can outlive the people who first believed them.